Entrusted Talents, Different Abilities in Children, and Appropriate Education. Awakening of the Spirit. Introductory information. The Lord is together with the disciples and a few hundred people in the inn of Lazarus, situated on the Mount of Olives. He has just taught his listeners the parable of the king, the servants, and the entrusted talents. Afterwards, he asks one of the guests, an Indian magician, if he understood the lesson and if he agrees with the king's course of action. Chapter 125. The magician's criticism of the parable of the entrusted talents. The magician said, "Lord, I have now come to a point where the ability to reason has left man, making even the most patient individual's hair stand on end. Surely you are not the tyrannical king who takes from where he did not deposit anything, and who wants to reap from where he did not sow. Because it seems to me that everything originated from you, that you have sown everywhere, and can therefore take from and reap everywhere as well, since everything is and must be yours." The fact that the evildoers are chastised is perfectly acceptable. In my opinion, the divine longanimity is exactly what is so unbearable about all this, because that is how the wicked ones buy themselves more and more time and space to achieve their atrocities, while the proper and decent man sinks into ever greater misery, loses all his faith in the end, and is compelled to return the talent entrusted to him in the sweatcloth of his misery to the stern and merciless Lord, undamaged and honest. Yes, in that sense it is of course better to be a called one than a servant. It is certainly right that the zealous servant receives his just reward, according to his deeds, but the fact that the somewhat slower and more fearful servant receives absolutely nothing for the return of his talent, that I find somewhat inappropriate of your king. I am a friend of the people, and I do not wish to see anyone suffering, especially when the person in question does not deserve to suffer, since they are not some villain. The servant who returned the one talent in the sweatcloth to his lord, exactly as he had received it, apparently did not have the same perception and intelligence as the first servant, and not even as the second one, who managed to turn the one talent into 5 talents. Because if he had the same intelligence, he could also have earned 10 or at least 5 talents. But since he lacked light, the proper intelligence, and the necessary courage, he did not dare to do anything else with the one talent besides leaving it untouched and eventually returning it to his lord. I truly cannot see any evil intent in this course of action, and I would like to ask you explicitly what happened afterwards to this servant, who was called a rogue by his lord. Said I, the Lord. Well, he remained what he had always been, a simple and ordinary servant, because he did not possess any ability out of himself for a more important task. For even a chosen one receives the same abilities or talents as any other person, which he himself must then develop, so that his free will does not get harmed in any way. He who develops the talent he received as much as possible then possesses a true treasure, to which will be added evermore. However, he who did not develop it and did not wish to pull himself away from his laziness can only blame himself, because by keeping the talent in the sweatcloth, he becomes even more foolish than those who did not want the King of Light to rule over them. That is why such lazy servants do not progress, and the called ones persist in their darkness. And there can be nothing worse for them than hearing the noise of the brightest day, waking them up from their sluggish sleep. Should the sun have to first send messengers to those late risers, asking if it would be alright for them if the sun were to rise above the mountains? Look, the sun will not do that, since it needs to preserve the universal order that sustains all worlds, and even less will the King of Light and Life do that. He who receives the talent surely received the order of the king as well. Whether the servant conforms to it will depend on his free will. The king is not guilty of the laziness of the servant, only the servant himself, because the King of Light knows all too well what talents he equipped the servant with. Therefore, it is always the king, and never the lazy and indolent servant who is in his true and definitely not imagined right. Now think about this thoroughly. Consider this image carefully, and then tell me if the king is truly a relentless tyrant. Have you understood me well now? The magician said, "Yes, Lord, that I did indeed understand well now, and your parable has certainly been illuminated, because as an image it was difficult to understand on its own. Thus, he who recognizes a special talent within himself must develop it in all earnest, namely by and out of himself. If he has done this, then he will surely receive everything else from the King of Light, and with this he will be able to become a true teacher for many people. These teachers are what you identify as the called ones, because he who was already a proper teacher for himself will become a teacher for others more easily as well. However, he who was already lazy for himself will be all the more lazy for others too, and he will possess nothing of value he could teach his fellow men. With all this in mind, it is quite true and just that he who already possesses things shall be given even more, so that he will have an abundance. But he who possessed nothing in abundance, from him shall be taken away all that he had. This is now perfectly clear to me, but there is still something here that just does not quite make sense to me. And for that reason, I take the liberty to ask you, O Lord, to elucidate this still obscure thought to me. Behold, just diligence and zeal in all that is good and true is a virtue that can never be praised enough, and laziness is the basis for all possible vices. But who is the one who bestows diligence and zeal upon one person and laziness upon another? It is my belief that neither the one nor the other can be attained by man himself, but that they are instead given to him by a higher, divine willpower. I myself have a few children with whom I have experienced this phenomenon. Some of them, namely my oldest son and a daughter, are, even without my intervention, incredibly zealous in developing their skills and knowledge, while my other children are lazy and slow and must always be firmly urged to study. These are children of the same parents. They are all healthy. All of them receive the same tuition. And nevertheless, there is such a great difference in their talents, and even more so in their zeal to study. What is the cause of this? It cannot be my and my wife's fault, since we treat all of our children equally and do not pamper them in any way. The reason cannot be ours or the children's physical health either, since we are all completely healthy and strong. For this, we do thank you, O Lord. And all of us receive the same food as well. And yet, there are still these apparent differences within one and the same family. How am I supposed to make sense of this? Chapter 126. The proper education of children according to their talents. The importance of the inner development for the awakening of the spirit. Said I, "No problem at all. As I have shown you earlier, there must be all kinds of differences among men, so that they all have need of and can serve each other. If all people were equally diligent and had the same talents, very soon they would have no need at all of each other. That is why even children of the same parents have different talents and abilities. The educator must, however, be able to evaluate these properly, and then instruct the children accordingly. This way, they will all be guided towards their intended goal. But if, despite the different talents and abilities of your children, you want all of them to become, for instance, tailors or weavers, then of course you will only find true diligence and zeal in those who have a knack for it. Later on, when those children become independent, they will not be doing much for the benefit of their fellow men, since without the right talent, they will never be able to be as efficient in what they have learned than those who had the right talent for it since birth. In light of this, the reason for the disparate zeal among the children lies mainly with their parents and teachers during their youth. The grapevine brings forth the grape, and the fig tree brings forth the fig. Both fruits taste sweet, but if you treat the fig tree the same as the grapevine, it will bring forth only few fruits. And if you let the grapevine grow like the fig tree, that is, without pruning it, then the grapevine will soon wither and produce only few grapes. Have you understood this well? Now the magician said, "O Lord, I thank you for this great and wonderful explanation. Yes, here man can realize how truly blind and ignorant he is with all his presumed wisdom. How many things the worldly wise persuade themselves of, and yet they miss the forest for the trees. If man would only be willing to open his eyes just a little, it would be so obvious. Clearly, every child has a different character and frame. One is taller than the other, one is rougher, yet another is very gentle and delicate. So even on the outside, there are already great differences between children of the same parents. Then how different will they be on the inside? Should the external differences not be sufficient for any intelligent man to conclude that there must be great differences in people's talents and abilities as well, so that an apparently wise teacher and master could point out any given person's talents, helping them with word and deed to develop their gifts in a noble and successful manner? Oh no, that is not sufficient at all for the blind wise man, which I myself have been and still am. He wants all men to be the same. They must all think and act exactly like him, and be willing to carry great burdens, for which they might not even have the strength. And so, it is not rare for people to be turned into fools instead of wise men. Fools who are of no use to themselves or anybody else. I thank you again for this lesson, O Lord, from the bottom of my heart. First, we will apply this to our own children, in a fruitful manner, of course. Thereupon Agricola said, "Yes, this is indeed a golden lesson, of which we Romans will make use as well. I in particular will, because, first of all, I have children myself. And secondly, the young ones that I am taking from here to Rome will be educated accordingly, as their talents will show me. Of course, a basic and general education needs to proceed for all of them. For instance, the reading of scriptures, writing and mathematics, as well as the instruction in all languages spoken by people within the Roman Empire. Without this essential knowledge, not much can become of any man. After that, every man will be educated according to his most distinguishing talent. Lord, is this correct?" Said I, "Sure. For all men must first be able to walk, grip with their hands, see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, before they are capable of performing any practical work. And so, men are indeed in need of the basic education you mentioned, with which it is certainly easier to attain the true wisdom of life. At the same time, however, one must not consider this basic education the main issue, so that men will not spend their entire lives studying scriptures and languages, thus forgetting the inner development that will awaken their spirits. For only therein lies the true value of life. Of what use is it to a man if he can write and understand all the scriptures of the world, and speak the tongues of all men, but his soul would be damaged? Therefore, before anything else, seek God's kingdom on earth. Seek it within yourselves, and everything else will be given to you in addition. But without God's kingdom, man would have as good as nothing, even if he possessed all the treasures of the earth and the knowledge of all the worldly wise. He who possesses God's kingdom within his heart has everything. He has the most elevated and deepest knowledge within himself, as well as eternal life, including the power and might thereof. This is surely more than everything the people of this world have ever considered great and most valuable. Tomorrow in Emmaus, you will all be witnessing what it means to be a perfect man. I tell you, a truly perfect man can do more than all the other imperfect men on earth. Therefore, strive to become perfect men before anything else. Should you achieve this goal, then you are everything, and you have everything. But I also tell you that attaining the kingdom of God now requires might. Those who wish to possess it must seize it for themselves by force. Those who won't do this will hardly even get it completely into their living possession here on earth.